love to talk to you about forest bathing if you ever want to talk to me about that. And that's it. So maybe, I'm not sure if everybody can hear me out there. It's a little strange for me to do this because I can't see you. So maybe if you could say hello in the chat so I know you're there. Right now I'm just looking at my screen. Okay, Ashley, do you want me to continue?
Yep, just let me know when you're ready to move forward.
Okay, so today we're going to go over just an introduction to reflective supervision. I'm feeling like this doesn't do it justice. We will have a 4-day deeper reflective supervision training offered by the Infant Mental Health Association. It's coming up at the end of November, beginning of December. And if you have any questions about that, you can either email me. My email is at the end of this PowerPoint, or maybe at the end of today, I can answer some questions. But today's really just an overview, just to give you sharing what I've learned about reflective supervision along the way. Maybe if we could take 1 minute, I just want to say I'm appreciating all you are and all you do, everything you've taken to come here today. We're having this discussion as we're at a time when we're still impacted by the global pandemic, racial reckoning, as well as many other traumas. Thank you for everything you've done. I respect all the work you've done to help people cope and meet challenges, both visiting in their home or maybe supporting people who are visiting people, and any personal challenges you might have faced in the past year or so as well. So maybe this is a good time for us to try to just come into presence, shifting your mind away from whatever you were doing before. And we're going to do a 1-minute meditation. So if you could just settle comfortably in your chair, relaxed posture, close your eyes or open them. If you need some energy and it's after lunch and you want to stand up, please do so. And just try to take a few slow, deep breaths. And gently scan your body, noticing any areas of tension. Tune into around your eyes, your jaw, your shoulders, your belly. Just soften and relax. Maybe notice the sounds around you, if it's raining softly or intensely. Be aware of the beginning and the ending of the sounds and the space between the sounds. And just how everything that you perceive, sensations and sounds, they arise and they release. Maybe just noticing if your energy is a great match for what we're about to do or a terrible match. If you're feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, and just noticing it and allowing it to be. Okay, Ashley, I'm ready for the next one. Okay, so I've shared that, so you could go right to the next one. Okay, so I'm going to first start to talk about what we mean when we say the Infant Mental Health Association. This whole training today is offered by the Infant Mental Health Association. Infant mental health concerns the relationships that infants and young children develop with their primary attachment figure. It can be a parent or another primary caregiver. Infant mental health is sometimes referred to as infant brain health. It's been defined as developing capacity of the child from birth to age 5 to experience, regulate, and express emotions, form close, secure interpersonal relationships, and explore his or her environment, all and to learn within the context of the family, the community, and cultural expectations. Promoting these relationships in a culturally sensitive context is the work of professionals from many disciplines, including health, human services, and education. When these earliest relationships are positive, responsive, and predictable, they set the stage for successful learning and later development. Okay, Ashley, next slide, please. 3 reasons why good infant mental health matters. Brain architecture. We have a shared stake to make sure that babies develop sturdy brain architecture, because this is the foundation that supports lifetime of learning and productive participation in society. A reliable caregiver who's responsive to a baby's needs is the secure base, so the baby can have a secure attachment and allow them to explore and learn. Body and health. Toxic stress from broken caregiver-infant relationships, it can push a baby's stress hormones into overdrive. When constantly present, these hormones disrupt brain and physical development. Babies can't learn if their brain and bodies are working against them. The antidote to toxic stress is affection and protection by a nurturing caregiver. And the last one, behavior and relationships. Secure attachment is a fundamental building block of social function. Children need relationships with sensitive caregivers to self-regulate, get along with others, solve problems, and be productive. It's the basic for civic and economic prosperity. Okay, next slide, please. So your goals for today in this hour and a half or 2 hours that we're together are to define reflective supervision, what it is, name 3 essential components of reflective supervision, and explain why reflective supervision is important. And again, I'll remind you there's a more in-depth 4-day training on reflective supervision offered at the end of November, beginning of December. You could check the Connecticut Association of Infant Mental Health website if you're interested in attending. It's going to be for supervisors, master's levels, people who are infant mental health endorsed or in the process of being endorsed. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to walk you through a lot of different experts on their view and their definition of reflective supervision. So Avalon and Dwell, they define reflection as stepping back from the immediate intense experience of our hands-on work with infant, toddlers, and families, and wondering together what the experience really means, and then asking questions and reflecting honestly, thinking about what does it tell us about ourselves? What do we know about this family? How is it to be this baby or to be this parent? How do I feel taking care of this baby or being in this home? Okay. What is reflective supervision consultation? According to Dr. Shamoon Chinook, reflective supervision is a collaborative relationship for professional growth. It improves program quality and practice by cherishing strengths and partnering around vulnerabilities to generate growth. Douglas Davies said reflective supervision consultation, for me, an essential goal of reflective supervision is to help a worker disentangle herself from the messiness of a case. First, by joining her in exploring the emotional aspects of the messiness, and then by working to co-create a shared, more objective understanding that may allow her to re-enter the work with clearer eyes, a sense of realism, and a tentative plan. Okay, next slide, please. So there are 3 building blocks to reflective supervision: the reflection, collaboration, and regularity. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, it comes from the guidebook I received when I did my reflective supervision training with the infant mental health. It's called A Practical Guide to Reflective Supervision by Cheryl Scott Heller and Linda Gilkerson. So briefly, these building blocks, reflection is the first one, stepping back to consider the work from multiple perspectives, including from what one and others observe, feel, and think. Okay, next one. Collaboration. Collaboration is the respectful mutual exchange that relies on the full participation of both the supervisor and the supervisee. Okay, the next one, regularity. Predictable routines and sufficient frequency create the interpersonal safety that's necessary for authentic interaction around strengths, vulnerabilities, and the intrinsic problems of practice. There's a mutually determined set schedule for supervision. I know the group that, oh, you could go back for a second to that one, Ashley. The group that I currently work with, they come from different agencies, and I've been really grateful because they've been able to make every single meeting. Everybody's been able to commit to it, even when there's been staff challenges, there's been stress. We meet 2 times a month, and it is predictable, and everybody's been there, and everyone makes a point not to let that meeting be interrupted. Okay, could move on. So now we're going to distinguish the difference between administrative, clinical, and reflective supervision. So in administrative supervision, it relates to the oversight of federal, state, agency regs, program policies, rules, and procedures. Supervision that's primarily administrative will be driven to achieve the following goals: hiring, training, or educating staff, overseeing paperwork, writing reports, explaining rules and policies, coordinating, monitoring productivity, or evaluating performance. Clinical supervision or consultation, it's usually case focused, but it doesn't necessarily consider what the practitioner brings to the intervention, and nor does it necessarily encourage the exploration of emotion as it relates to work with an infant, toddler, and family. Supervision or consultation that's primarily clinical will most likely include many or all the administrative objectives that are listed above, as well as the following objectives: reviewing casework, discussing a diagnostic impression and diagnosis, discussing intervention strategies related to the intervention, maybe reviewing the treatment plan or an intervention, or reviewing or evaluating clinical progress. Often there's a moment where people are giving guidance or advice, and there's usually a moment for teaching. Reflective supervision consultation, it's always clinical. Sometimes it does have administrative components, whereas administrative and clinical supervision consultation is not always reflective. Reflective supervision consultation is distinct due to the shared exploration of what we call the parallel process. That is when we pay attention to all the relationships, including the ones between the practitioner and the supervisor, between the practitioner and the parent, and between the parent and the infant and toddler. It's critical to understand how each of these relationships affects the others. So reflective supervision and consultation, it relates to professional and personal development within one's discipline by attending to the emotional content of the work and how reactions to the content affect our work. There's often a greater emphasis on the supervisor consultant's ability to listen and wait, allowing the supervisee to discover the solutions, the concepts, and the perceptions on their own without interruption from the supervisor or the consultant. So, in summary, how is reflective supervision or consultation different from other supervision? Administrative supervision is going to focus on regs, policies, rules, procedures, and it's more directive. Clinical, it's going to be more case focused, not necessarily considering what the practitioner brings, nor does it necessarily encourage the exploration of emotions as it relates to the work with infant, toddlers, and family. Reflective supervision consultation, it goes beyond to a shared exploration of the parallel process. So it's important to remember that a relationship is the foundation for reflective supervision and consultation. All growth and discovery about the work and oneself takes place within this context of a trusting relationship. When you have a reflective supervision consultation, it's not a place where people problem solve, analyze, teach, advise, evaluate performance. There's plenty of forums to meet these purposes. Why would you add this to a already full list of work tasks? Jerry Paul said, because we're human, it's not possible to work on behalf of other human beings to try to help them out without having powerful feelings aroused in yourself. Our work can be really difficult. We're impacted by secondary trauma, sometimes our own traumas. We're doing this work in the context of COVID, historical trauma. It can impact our relationships, our mood, our attention, our health, our sleep. There's a great need for self-care, and when that doesn't happen, we can hit burnout. Sometimes we think about our cases and our families or what's going on in our agencies when we're not at work. This can lead to a high turnover. Sometimes this pace is not sustainable for people. Trauma, the impact of trauma ripples. It can trigger our own pain. Reflective supervision is a way to feel supported as somebody explores and understands and soothes the difficult emotions that we face in our work. Some of the basic principles or beliefs of reflective supervision. Ablon and Dwell describe it as a place to support and promote the development of a relationship-based organization. It's based on the belief that supervision is a context for learning and professional development. The goal is to create an environment in which people do their best thinking. Working in this safe place, staff are empowered to assess their own performance, developing awareness of their feelings, managing their emotions, and experiencing the very sort of relationship that they're expected to provide to the children and families they serve. I know when I was a teacher, I learned a quote from John Dewey. He would say, each experience lives on in further experiences. Reflective supervision is a place that our capacity to harness that wisdom and guide it to its rightful place. So what to expect when once it is set up in your agency? Some people meet twice a month for an hour at a set time that does not change. Some groups meet once a month for 2 hours at a time at a set day and time that doesn't change. During the pandemic, people have been meeting remotely, so that's why typically people used to meet one-on-one once a month, but people were finding that one meeting for 2 hours online was a lot. So a lot of people have found it more effective to meet once a month for 2 hours at the same time and day each month. Some people meet one-on-one with a reflective supervisor. I'm doing that myself. Some people meet in a small group with a reflective supervisor and consultant. Okay, next slide, please. So every time I have a reflective supervision group, or if I meet with my own reflective supervisor, there's rituals and routines. The supervisor prepares for the meeting. Once we get there, we greet and reconnect with everybody. We find the agenda. The provider tells the story, focusing on details or maybe an area of their work that's distressing or confusing. They seek to understand different perspectives and generate hypotheses with the support of the group. They consider the next possible steps. As the group ends, we reflect on how the process went. And then after the group, the supervisor reflects on how the process is going. So what does the reflective supervisor bring to the relationship? Reflective supervisor consultation qualifications, they include, they must be endorsed by an infant mental health association. The reflective supervisor can be someone from your agency or organization who's endorsed by the Connecticut Association of Infant Mental Health. A reflective consultant is someone outside of your agency who's endorsed by the Association of Infant Mental Health, and they're contracted to provide individual or group reflective supervision or consultation. The endorsement specifications are listed on our website. If you want to look at the Connecticut Association of Infant Mental Health, you can look up what it entails to be endorsed. Reflective supervisors commit to being part of and obtaining their own reflective supervision. So as a practice, we care about social justice, inclusion, equity, and racial disparities. And therefore, in all our discussions, we try to engage in intentional, ongoing, critical self-reflection about how our experiences, our history, our training, our sociocultural context, and other aspects of our lives shape our values, our beliefs, our perceptions, and how that might impact our work with young children. So there are many dimensions of the therapeutic processes. Today, again, this is a reminder, this is only an introduction to reflective supervision. This is a brief overview of what it may look like and the tools the supervisor may use to foster this process. So the therapeutic processes in brief are the the interactions that happen between the supervisor and the supervisee. As I'm interacting with the group I work with, I'm thinking about safety. What is enabling them to feel safe in my group? What is helping them feel safe in their work? What gets in the way of safety? How are the people that in their care or who they're working with, how is their felt sense of safety? I try to cultivate a place of observation, both for me and for the practitioners that come in, so we could observe the parallel process that's happening, always holding in mind the baby, how they're impacted by all the relationships that they're connected to. We think about the regulation of emotion. I start with myself. We think about that in our group. There's different formats to become self-aware and develop social emotional competency. It's a place to explore differences and become conscious about our use of self. The focus is more on the process. Reflection is a way to generate new ideas and possibilities. It's a way to hold relationships in mind during the week, even when we're not together. And it's respecting the nature of rupture and repair, expecting that there's going to be messiness and conflicts in our work, but knowing that the repair can build an even stronger relationship and possibly new skills. Okay. So some reflective questions you might hear a reflective supervisor consultant asking. They may say, what is your initial reaction? What thoughts or feelings were you having in that moment? Who do you identify with in this family or on your team? Does this situation remind you of a situation in your personal life? Am I having really strong feelings or reaction in this situation? Do I act or feel differently with this family than I generally act or feel? What are my expectations of myself when I work with this family? What am I taking for granted? What more do I need to know? What is the caregiver's state of mind? What might they be thinking and feeling? Or what is the child's state of mind? What might they be thinking and feeling? Okay, so now I'm gonna, before I go into my reflective supervision group, I think about what format might be helpful for the group. So there's lots of different resources out there. So there's many different experts and many different activities to help me select what format to use. I'm going to give a brief overview today of 4 of the formats. So the first format, and usually when I think about these formats, again, I'm thinking about what do the group members need? Do they need to slow down? Do they need to hold the baby in mind? Do they need to figure out more ways to wonder and ponder different hypotheses? Or maybe they need a place to release some of the emotional residue from their work. Or maybe they need a way to get over some of the obstacles that are present in their work. So very briefly, the RIOS is a tool. I'll go into that in more depth. I usually ask my participants which tool they want to use. By now, I've given them a sampling of the different formats, and I try to give them power to figuring out what they need, what would be helpful in their work. So the RIOS is a tool that the participants will use to understand the family story, hold the baby in mind, think about the professional use of themselves, the parallel process, and in a minute, I'll show you the clearly defined components of that. Fish bowling is a great activity. We've been able to do it online and in person. The purpose of the fish bowling is really to build our listening skills, to build some observation and wondering. So what we do is the participant picks one partner to share what's going on in their work. The other members of the group listen as if there's a glass wall, and they can't interrupt and they can't have any reaction as the participant shares what's going on in their work. So The participant shares what's going on. They share what their concerns are. It's a little more free flowing. They might share what their hypotheses are. And the other group just listens. Then they switch roles. The participant and their partner just listens as the other group really just stays in a wondering place, asking questions and wondering about what they heard. Maybe what it felt like to be the baby, what the practitioner might be experiencing, maybe wondering about some other elements. And then the whole group takes a quiet 1 minute period to just digest everything they heard. And then the whole group meets back together again to process what was happening and consider some next steps. Another format that I sometimes use is called the body, speech, mind practice. This type of practice is really a different way of describing a client. It's usually different for people who've had a lot of clinical training because it invites our intuitive awareness. The purpose is really to bring the client and the client's therapeutic relationship vividly into the group supervision. It's used really to think about how to energize the work sometimes, or to think about the conceptual obstacles that inhibit our clinical work. A way to look at it is sometimes people present the client with whom they're having difficulty in terms of their diagnosis or labels. This body, speech, mind practice moves beyond that. It actually encourages people not to use those labels. They might even just come in, they're really just tasked to bring the client into the room by describing the person in great detail. They might have to describe the person, how they look, where they live, their relationship with their environment. They may describe the person and how they feel and how they relate to their emotions. And they really try to just bring that into the room in a very detailed way. The group members track their individual experiences and later they report it to the group. It's the mindset that whatever arises is somehow relevant for the presentation. So again, it's not an interpretation. It's describing a client and their own experiences. Usually we have a lot of training to analyze or categorize. This is a way where you just describe the person in the areas of body, speech, and mind. You avoid psychological terminology and you use ordinary language. What it often does, this process, is it removes obstacles to connection. The last format, I'm giving a very brief overview of it, is a DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy consultation team format. And the way we use that, maybe one activity, there's a whole structure and a whole format, which if you do the 4-day supervision series, you'll learn more about it. But just to give you a sampling of when we use that format, sometimes we use a bell or we make a noise, and it's to really build awareness or containment of any unresolved dialectic issues. So if somebody's presenting and there's some awareness of fragility, we call attention to that because that's going to be an obstacle in the work. No one should be treated as fragile. Everyone has strengths and capacities. If we hear a judgmental or critical mindset coming in, we call attention to that. We ring a bell. If somebody's jumping to solutions or meaning making, we ring a bell or we may have a sound, something to bring awareness to that. If we're intervening rather than teaching or guiding, we bring awareness to that. Okay, the next one, please. Okay, so this is the Rios. This is a really great graphic. It shows how in-depth it can be when we use this Rios form. So again, on the outside, you see that we try to cultivate an environment in our supervision group, but also as a practitioner moves in to work with families, that's caring, hopeful, challenging, not intrusive, responsive, compassionate, non-judgmental, self-reflective. There's an appreciation for the parallel process. The meetings are consistent, they're reliable. We try to build safety. We try to hold ambivalence and just listen carefully and partnering with them in the process. As a supervisor, we try to stay open to the supervisee, minimize any distractions, maintaining perspective, demonstrating self-control, strong attention, self-awareness, skillful observations, and remaining engaged in a curious way. So these are consistently scheduled meetings. It's a calm, comfortable environment, private space, quiet space, regularly scheduled. The group that I work with, I've also been really impressed. People, I know one member gets some knocks on the door, but other than that, there's been no interruptions. That time has been really sacred. So I notice that they're very supported in their agencies to take, this hour twice a month to just have this quiet space. There's a professional use of self we consider. There's the parallel process again, understanding the family story, the working alliance, and holding the baby in mind. Okay, next slide. So some questions you might hear the supervisor ask when they're using the RIOS, the Reflective Supervision Consultation Framework. They might say, what do we know about this family? How do we and others think and feel about this? What might this mean? What might this mean for the baby? What might this mean for the parent or the foster parent? What might this mean for the teacher? What might this mean for a member of the team? What might this mean for the practitioner? And why does it matter? Why is it so important? And different groups go into different directions. I know the group I'm working with has been really curious about attachment and considering why these interactions matter. There's an integration piece where we think about what have we learned as we've talked about all of this. And so all of this is a way of understanding the family's story, focusing on the relationships among all the adults that surround that baby or toddler. It's a way to always hold that baby in mind. Sometimes as we talk about what's happening in our work, the baby can get lost in it. There's a lot of stress, and sometimes the baby can get lost in that. And this is a way to attend to the baby's relationships with everybody. It's paying attention to the professional use of self, how all the relationships the practitioner has with others. And again, always that parallel process, noting the way in which one relationship affects and is affected by other relationships. Okay, next slide. So what the supervisee brings to reflective supervision? The supervisee, they agree on the regular time and place to meet. They arrive on time and they remain emotionally available. They come prepared to share the details of a particular situation, a home visit, an assessment, an experience, or dilemma, if it's their day to share. So I know in my group, we have a rotating schedule. People are prepared at the end of each session who's going to go next. I remind them on that day, and I send an email again reminding them. We talk about what format we hope to use, or the person may tell me right before the group meets what format they're comfortable with, or sometimes I decide. The supervisee is expected to ask questions that allow the other participants to think more deeply about their work with young children and families, or to ask questions that pertain to their own work. The supervisee has to be aware of their feelings that they have in response to their work and in the presence of the infant or the young child or the parent or the caregiver. When they're able and they feel safe, the hope is that they share the feelings with the supervisor, the consultant, and the other group members. And they explore the relationship of their feelings and how it impacts the work they're doing. And we hold space in a curious way, just wondering how these feelings might impact themselves, others, and always the child. Over time, the supervisee allows supervisors to provide some support. We always try to bring awareness to suspend any critical or harsh judgment of the participant themselves or anyone else. And we always hold time at the end, and the supervisee is expected to reflect on the session, the supervision or consultation session, and how it's enhancing their professional practice or growth. Maybe what worked well in our process. Where do we need to grow? Okay, next slide, please. So when it's going well, supervision's a holding environment. It's a place to feel secure enough and to expose insecurities, mistakes, questions, and difference. Okay, next slide, please. So combating oppression is critical for us in the mental health profession. The diversity-informed tenets are guides for making personal, professional, and systemic commitments to disrupt or transform of racialized injustices that are in our society. I know in my own work, I return to my reflective supervision sessions to face the many mistakes I make, the biased beliefs I may be carrying and may be unaware of as I comb through the different interactions I have in the course of my work. Our profession, all of our professions are a platform for social justice practices, for addressing any inequities is really central to our work. We're trying to make a commitment to a conscious course of study of how biases can be internalized and perpetuated. Reflective supervision and consultation really has a powerful role in the positive effects of a relationship, and it can go from beyond the group to helping families bring in more equitable ways to even treat their children, or holding families as they're facing some of these inequities. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is a wonderful leader in the field where I'm about to show you. Her name is Dr. Eva Marie Shivers. She has done research on reflective supervision consultation sessions and how they can be a really powerful place for transformation, for disrupting bias. She feels like they really are true to that first diversity-informed tenet of self-awareness. So maybe, Ashley, if you can click the link. And it's on 1 hour and 26.
So move over to 1 hour and 26.
Yep, thank you so much. And so we're just going to listen to some of her great work and her hopeful research findings.
Is simply not enough to transform our hearts, our minds, our practices, our systems, our organizations, our families. It is not enough. We need to think about this work in terms of healing and transformation. So and we don't often talk about that in our field, but we're going to share some research with you that hopefully will kind of open your minds and hearts to a new way, maybe for some of you, of thinking about how we do our work. Next slide, please. So we do have emerging evidence that early childhood mental health consultation is a promising disruptor of bias and disparities. I'm going to share a little bit of that information with you first. But first, I'd like to talk about what is early childhood mental health consultation. Next slide, please. And before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge our time is running out. I know that we said we would go until 11, but we do have an extra half hour that we were going to allot for question and answers. I'm going to keep going with this content. For those of you who really want to understand these connections to mental health consultation, I think you'll be really excited by what we're discovering around the country. And so if you can stay on, please do stay with us. And we'll have maybe a little bit of time for question and answers at the end, but we're also hoping there's so much interest in this topic. We're hoping to also schedule a separate live in real time question and answer session where we can go deeper into all of these questions that you guys have been posing throughout our webinar today. So let's talk about mental health consultation. So central to early childhood mental health consultation is, we talk about our theory of change. Why do things change? What do we believe about what changes and why? So the focus of mental health consultation are changes in adults, not necessarily children. That's kind of a ripple effect of this, but changes in the adults. And in this case, a lot of mental health consultation happens in early care and education settings, but not always. Mental health consultation can be offered to home visiting programs, pediatrician offices. Increasingly, we're seeing mental health consultants work with staff at homeless shelters. So we're seeing an expansion of where mental health consultation is delivered, but really, by and large, it's delivered in early care and education settings, mostly in center-based settings. So we're focusing on changes in the adults, right? Teachers, directors, their knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, in contrast with a focus on the pathology within an individual child or family. So you see already in this theory of change, we're thinking about that metaphor of the fish and the groundwater. Mental health consultation is not necessarily exclusively focused on fixing the fish who have turned upside down. We're really taking a look at the teachers, the adults, who are the people who are surrounding those tiny little fishies. Okay, next slide, please. So I'd like to share with you just some highlights of what we've been discovering in our research and evaluation around the country. And again, these are just highlights. I think many of you will have more questions for me and for us here at Indigo, and perhaps even other evaluators and researchers who are also working in early childhood mental health consultation. But today I'd like to focus on sharing some highlights of first from Arizona's statewide mental health consultation program. It's known as Smart Support. It is funded by First Things First, and it's a program that's run out of Southwest Human Development in Phoenix, Arizona. Next slide, please. So, okay, not yet, please just hold on. I wish I could control the slides because I like to unveil things slowly. All right, so one of the things that we found first and foremost was that for our whole sample, and we conducted a really large evaluation, we had just around 800 teachers who were involved in our mental health consultation evaluation. We had data from a little over 1,000 focused children. These are children who were kind of the focus of conversations with teachers and consultants. We're referring to them as focused children. We collected data at baseline, 6 months, and also at 12 months. So first and foremost, of course, we wanted to know, this is a summative or outcomes-based evaluation. We wanted to know, did things change? Did our outcomes shift? Did outcomes improve? And the answer is yes. We found improvement in positive outcomes. We found a decrease in the negative outcomes for our entire sample. And then very quickly after that, after we celebrated that, we continued to explore what were some of the differential impacts of Smart Support and mental health consultation, and were there certain groups for whom the rate of change might have been higher. We're very familiar with the literature and the findings and the research done by Walter Gilliam and the data presented by the Office of Civil Rights. And so we were really curious about racialized data and racialized disparities. So we looked at our data in that way too. So I just advanced to the next thing here. So we found that Smart Support was effective at ameliorating, next slide, please. Racial disparities for African-American preschoolers. There were gender disparities as well for boys, but what our focus was really on is what happened with African-American preschoolers. Next slide, please. And so what improved over the 12 months? Please advance, please. So for mostly what we saw gaps close for African American boys. So the gender and racial gap, you know, we don't talk a whole lot about intersectionality in our field, but we need to start examining it and not be afraid of the nuances that come with looking at intersectionality. I would probably add disability in there as well, just to make it a little bit more complicated. But for this particular analysis, we saw that with African American boys, at baseline, they were rated lower than other children. By 6 months, those gaps had kind of closed, and then by 12 months, the gaps had even surpassed, the outcomes had even surpassed where the other children were. And where we saw that particular trend were on the outcomes of child initiative, teacher-child closeness, teacher-child conflict, that went down over time, and that child's risk of expulsion went down over time. And I just want to really emphasize that these particular outcomes for children were teacher report. These are based on teacher report. So when we think about what our earlier speakers were talking about with, you know, subjective experience and how that's connected to implicit bias, we see here that teachers' ratings, you know, are really what's driving these outcomes that we're paying attention to. Next slide, please. And here's an example of, oh, that second graph is supposed to be conflict. So it would have just been a reverse slope that you would see. But basically you see that the blue line is African-American boys. The other line represents other children in our sample. And so you can kind of see how that rate of increase really changed for Black boys over time. We did analyze gaps for other groups of children. We looked at gaps for Latinx children. We also looked at African-American children total, so including girls and boys, and we didn't necessarily see gaps closing, but when we looked at results for African-American boys and girls together, just African-American children, we saw that even though gaps weren't necessarily closed, the teachers of African-American children, their rate of change, you know, due to smart support, due to mental health consultation, the rate of change was higher, those teachers for African-American children. So that's something we're getting ready to publish this data in a couple of months. And when it comes out, we'll definitely be including it on the Center of Excellence Equity Toolbox. We've got some really great resources up there. Okay, next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm rushing through this. I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible. And so some of our latest findings, this was an analysis conducted, it was conducted with smart support data, but it was led by Annie Davis at Georgetown University. And this particular paper was written by Annie, Deb Perry at Georgetown, and me. And it was really focused on this construct called the consultative alliance. And it is pretty much what you're probably guessing that it is, which is kind of when we think about what is it about mental health consultation that is so effective, because it's not just what's happening in Arizona where we're seeing these amazing impacts on children's outcomes across the country. We are seeing amazing increases in outcomes in all sorts of domains: child level, teacher level, classroom level, program level. And so, you know, now we're starting to ask more nuanced findings, like what is it that's driving these changes in outcomes? And so Annie Davis, you know, tried to see, well, do we have a way of actually measuring something as abstract as consultative alliance, which is really kind of the heart of the relationship, the way both the teacher and the mental health consultant really are aligned with one another. And so again, there's a paper that's actually out, and I don't know, we'll figure out a way to make sure that that's part of the resources that we can send. Please advance to the next bullet. So what Annie found is that consultative alliance predicted a positive change in the following outcomes. Please advance. Attachment, but only for boys of color, lower negative classroom emotional environment, teacher-child closeness increased, and teacher self-efficacy. But here's the catch. Consultative alliance predicted these beautiful changes and these outcomes only when, next advance, please. Only when the consultant either shared the same ethnic heritage as the teacher, right? So they were, you know, culturally, ethnically, racially matched, or the consultant had self-reported expertise in equity topics such as cultural responsiveness, anti-bias education, undoing racism. So here now we see that who's doing the work. We're getting to these more nuanced questions. What's improving and for whom, right? And we have these amazing findings about the consultative alliance. And so we're now paying attention to what is it that the consultant, the mental health consultant, brings in with them when they come to do their work. Well, they bring themselves, right? They bring themselves. And so having the same ethnic heritage as a teacher is a very crude marker for something else that's happening with that relationship, a different way of relating, maybe a different way of understanding context, right? So those are the things that we're trying to unpack now. The consultants who already kind of self-reported as having expertise in their ability to talk about issues related to culture and race and diversity, we suspect that these consultants were able to lean into those conversations, or perhaps even kind of point out when disparities were being observed. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we spent a lot of time after we saw these findings, especially the gaps closing, we spent a lot of time actually talking with our mental health consultants. We found these amazing findings with gaps being closed for African-American children. And we immediately went back to the consultants and said, wow, look at these findings. Were you guys talking about race? Were you having explicit conversations about race or about culture or diversity? And some of the consultants raised their hands, but most of them didn't, they looked a little shocked and kind of, eyes wide. And so we said, well, then let's explore what happened. Why is it that mental health consultation, that we were able to close these gaps? Okay, please advance to the next bullet. So these are some of the responses. Keep going. These are the responses that the consultants would share. We lean in with teachers. We hold their gaze. We encourage curiosity about the meaning of children's behavior. They talked about self-awareness for themselves, and self-awareness kind of being promoted within teachers as well. They talked a lot about presence in the here and now and perspective taking. We talked about emotional regulation and empathy, which supports compassionate action. And when we think earlier to what we understand, what Rosemary shared and Lisa and Chantel about all these data out there that just seem so heavy and just so heavy, how do you heal that? Well, simply giving a teacher a list of here are the strategies you need to, be able to be a certain way with children, these gaps are persisting. These racialized gaps in children's outcomes are persisting. Chantel shared some data from the 70s, and then today it was still the same. Nothing has really changed. Why is that? What will it take to change the way we're observing practices in classrooms, the way outcomes are playing out in classrooms and with children and families? What will it take? And so what's exciting to us at Indigo, and I think many other people around the country too, is I think with mental health consultation, what we're tapping into is something that is really more related to transformation. Being present enough to see the water that we're swimming in, right? Being in a relationship with somebody who's holding space for you to say the things that you might not say to somebody else or admit to somebody else. When I think about the reasons why mental health consultation is a promising disruptor of bias, I think a lot about the consultative stance. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with mental health consultation, the consultative stance is probably, I think we're calling it a framework. I can't remember right now, but it is guiding tenets about the way mental health consultants do their work. And it's in a book that was written by Khadijah Johnston and Charles Brenneman, and it is one of the key resources that most mental health consultants and their supervisors are very familiar with. It's a common book that's used as a book club and people discuss it. It's heavily relied upon in professional development for mental health consultants and supervisors. And so in that book, there's the consultative stance, and there are 10 elements, but there are about 5 or so that I think are particularly salient to really understanding and digging deeper. Why is mental health consultant seeming to be, closing some of these racialized gaps? One of the elements, they write, avoiding the position of sole expert. Right. So if you imagine, you're a teacher, and so many of us understand the many stressors that teachers are under, and so many of our professional development initiatives put the responsibility on the shoulder of the teachers to fix things and change things, right? And so when we think about a mental health consultant and the way that they work with teachers, they do things like avoid the position of sole expert, understanding another subjective experience, consider all levels of influence, right? That might also include a knowledge of history and structural racism and culture, right? And how to be responsive to different types of families and communities. And very key to the consultative stance is the centrality of relationships. And probably my favorite is one, that's the very last element, and it's holding hope, right? And for me, it just brings up notions of resilience and courage and strength. Okay, I think I could go on and on about these things, and I do a lot of work with organizations, infant and early childhood mental health organizations around the country, where we go really deep into a lot of these constructs as a way to get closer to transformation and healing. All right, next slide, please.
Okay, so you can
Okay.
there, Ashley. Thank you.
Okay, should I keep going?
Okay, and Ashley, if you could go back to the diversity informed tenants.
Okay.
Beautiful. And so I'm sorry, I know the video, it applies and maybe it's a stretch, but I guess I see the overlap as I'm doing this work, that there's so much hope for the place for this in home visitation. Again, going back to the central principle number 1, that self-awareness is going to lead to better services for families. Working with infants, children, and families requires all individuals, organizations, and systems of care to reflect on our own culture, our values, our beliefs, and how that impacts racism, classism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, xenophobia, and other systems of oppression that have had on our lives. And where we want to provide more diversity-informed, culturally attuned services. If you look down, we're looking at taking a stance where we acknowledge privilege and we combat discrimination. Discriminatory policies and practices that harm adults, harm infants and children in their care. I know I've been really grateful in my group. After maybe about 6 months, everybody started to feel safe enough to talk about some of these policies and practices that they feel like are harmful in their workplace. They've talked about how privileges can constitute injustice. They've acknowledged their privilege, where they hold it, and maybe trying to find more strategic and responsible ways to use it, or wondering what they might do with it. Another, when I think about that body, mind, speech practice, it is a way to recognize and respect non-dominant bodies of knowledge, moving away from the classic clinical labels we often can talk so quickly about, instead of recognizing non-dominant ways of knowing, other bodies of knowledges, sources of strength, routes to healing within all families and communities. It's a way to honor the diverse family structures. Families decide who's included and how they're structured. No particular family constellation or organization is inherently optimal compared to any others. It's a way to understand that the language that's used, it can hurt or it can heal. That there's power in our language. It can divide us or it can connect us. Sometimes in the reflective supervision, individual or consultation sessions, it's a way to think about our body language, the imagery, the other modes of nonverbal communication that are in our interactions. And thinking about how can we bring that to our work so it supports kids and families, caregivers, and the community. I know Heidi had another video she was hoping that I share. I'm just trying to see if it's in my inbox now. I didn't receive it yet, but if I receive it, I'm going to let you know, and I'll show you that next video. So maybe you can move down a few slides to the best practice guidelines. And so are you able to click on that, Ashley? Okay, so on the Connecticut Infant Association website, you can find this best practice guideline for reflective supervision consultation. And so maybe Ashley, you could just move slowly through it and I'll kind of highlight what's in there. This is a wonderful tool. It, as you see the table of contents, it has the purpose. It shares why it's considered best practice. It has the RIOS activity. It has the guidelines for the supervisor, the best practice guidelines for the supervisee, the general guidelines, and what reflective supervision consultation that meets criteria for endorsement. So you could just, I'll let you scroll through that slowly for everyone to get an overview of it. And just know it's a resource that's on that. It's accessible for everybody. And then Ashley, I'm going to share the other video. It just arrived in my box as well, okay?
Okay. So I'll stop sharing so I can log into my email and get it.
Okay, thanks. And remind me of your last name again, because I know we've had a few Ashleys.
Murphy.
Okay, thank you.
Heidi sent it to me. I think I got it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Heidi. Okay.
So I don't know if there's any questions in the chat that liaisons can call up while I get this running.
Okay. I'm not seeing any on my end, but if anyone else has them.
Right now, we do not have any questions so far.
Okay. And if anyone has any questions at all or any thoughts or anything you're wondering about, please put them in the chat.
Online store quickly with products that are ready to sell? Head over to wix.com/dropshipping and launch your store with the industry-leading e-commerce capabilities. First, choose what kind of store you want to create. Let's pick fashion.
Being an investigator is difficult, mostly because you are literally just moving from crisis to crisis. You're just always working through trauma with families while having to try to stay grounded yourself. And that is extremely difficult.
We use ourselves to engage with clients, and that is the cornerstone to child welfare work. To be able to do that effectively, people need the time and opportunity to think about how it feels to be in relationship with others and how to maintain a healthy self.
I'm really passionate about reflective consultation as a way of supporting people who do direct practice and even people in administration who are working with young children and families who've experienced trauma, adversity, and stress. It can really help manage the emotional impact of the work and also help people sort through the chaos and start to think more clearly about how can they support this child? How can they support this family? How can they try to attend to a child's developmental needs and relationship needs, even amongst the chaos?
In reflective consultation, we're thinking about how we feel because the work impacts us, but we're also thinking about feelings, this information. So maybe how did it feel to be in relationship with that client? How do I feel pulled to engage? And by thinking about that in reflective consultation, I gain clarity.
The model uses most often mental health trained folks to bring pieces of that mental health lens to a non-mental health workforce. It most often happens bi-weekly or monthly. It can happen in person, one-on-one. It can happen in a group setting. It can happen virtually.
I would meet bi-weekly with the consultant doing the reflective consultation for an hour over video conferencing and discuss my cases and my work. Being able to take a step back and actually look at your practice in a more holistic way and think about how it's impacting me, how it's impacting the families, what each member of the family, what their perspective might be of the circumstances was extremely helpful.
It's a holding space, a space where I could feel comfortable expressing my feelings in relationship to my work, a place where I could be vulnerable and talk about things that I didn't know, a place where I could get help in organizing my thoughts and wonders and feelings about a situation, and feel regulated.
Even though reflective supervision and consultation have become an embedded part of programs like Head Start, Nurse Family Partnership, and Healthy Families America, it's new in other work contexts, such as child welfare.
The system right now, the child protection system, doesn't inherently have training from a state down level on how do you support the workforce, how do you prevent turnover, how do you help people kind of understand their own implicit bias and what that brings to the work that they do. We don't have a lot of that built in right now. I would recommend that everyone participate in reflective supervision or reflective consultation. I think they would see lots of benefits to doing it. If workers are able to recognize what they bring to their work, then we as a system, as a child protection system, can prevent any further traumatization to families. The child protection system is already a traumatic experience for children and families. So workers have to be aware of their own stuff so that we can prevent that in the future. Sometimes there are administrators who worry about cost effectiveness, the cost of hiring new staff and traumatizing families as a system is way higher than, a couple $100 a month to support your staff in building their reflective capacity.
The reflective consultation really did help set how difficult it is in context, but also focus on child development outside of child safety, so you could really take in that bigger picture.
The payoff can be big, both in your retention rates and also in your employees' well-being, and in them feeling like they are effective in their work.
Okay, thank you so much.
So many different ones to do. Okay.
Yep, and so if you want to, is there any closing thoughts that anybody has or any questions?
Margaret,
Hi, Heidi. This is Haley. I was wondering if you could explain to the supervisor, so the process, so they have to go through your initial training and then they go into a reflective supervision group. So if you could just clearly articulate that to folks, I think that might be helpful.
Sure. I'm so glad you asked that question. I think right now, just as a back story or context, the Office of Early Childhood is committed to starting this process within home visiting. And so, as some of you may have seen or know about in the recent contracts you've had, there's been some inclusion of both endorsement and reflective supervision. And the way, the path that has been kind of started as to how this would work is that home visiting supervisors would begin to start by going to infant mental health, one of our training series, so that they could have the background or enhance their own knowledge about infant mental health. Then they would attend the reflective supervision training series, and this is for supervisors. And then they would be themselves able to participate in up to 2 years of reflective supervision, as we've described here today. And the reason why it started with supervisors is so that then after all the training and their own experience of reflective supervision, they would become more equipped to be able to offer reflective supervision to their own staff and become endorsed in infant or early childhood mental health. And what we've found is those that have the competencies in infant and early childhood mental health, which is what we're looking for to become endorsed, both by your work, your experiences, your trainings, is that through that path and that process of self-discovery and becoming endorsed and seeing your own competency while experiencing reflective supervision, it really sets you up to be able to offer that to others. And so it's very hard to get reflective supervision now unless you've had those steps. And so we're looking to, in the future, how this will then translate to home visitors who either may have participated in the past. Some of you may have gone through the home visiting training series that we did through a different grant that we had through DCF and Launch. And that included reflective supervision. So we're trying to play catch up to the people that already got it, so that this way now your supervisors will have this experience. And then this could be the culture in which you are all surrounded. So it can become a reflective culture where you work, which is very hard if only half of you are getting something. And so we're just sharing with you what this is as something to look forward to. And we hope that it happens for everyone in the near future, whether it's through outside consultants or in-house from your own endorsed reflective supervisors, which may be your direct supervisor. And so we hope this is helpful in kind of uncluttering the differences of the different kinds of supervision that you may experience, and look forward to this as helping you in your work. So I don't know if that's helpful, Haley.
Sure. I was wondering if you could also get into a little deeper about the path of endorsement specifically for a home visitor. So what would be their next step? What would they do after this training?
So if anyone's pursuing endorsement, they can go to our website to look at what we have there. We have a number of webinars you can go through to kind of, it shows you which of the 4 pathways you might pursue. And that's based on your own background, whether different education, different work experience, different trainings, different level of what your role is. You know, who are you serving? Are you a supervisor? Are you a clinician? Are you a home visitor? Are you prevention, intervention, diagnosis? So it's kind of like, what is your path as far as your role? There's not like a hierarchy. It's just more, how are you serving families, children, or the people that are working with families and children? And so you would see those 4 pathways and see how you fit in, which path would be yours, whether it's an infant family associate or an infant mental health specialist, or maybe you're a mentor. You focus on doing some clinical work, mentoring, and being a leader in the field. So once you discover which path you're on, you would then go through the process of applying. And that's just a brief application online where you go into our system. It's called the EASY system, the endorsement application system. And you put in your information. You have to be a member of the association. That's the first thing. And then there's a fee, which right now for supervisors is being paid, the application fee. And then you would go on to whichever level you would like to become endorsed. And so within that, you then begin to load into the computer online all of the information needed to show that you meet those competencies. And so the only thing that you're doing that's paper potentially is if your category of infant mental health that you're applying requires transcripts. You could either they have to be secure transcripts. And so you either email them through your university system, or you can mail them directly. So they do have to be sealed official transcripts. But everything else is online. And so there's not a lot of collecting paper and putting paper somewhere and things like that. Right now, the OEC is committed to paying just a certain amount. And so it may not cover the whole amount of your endorsement. It might be up to your program to fill that gap, or you personally. And so we're working to try and close that right now. It's an upfront cost for us because we have many volunteers now and reviewers, and we're paying an endorsement coordinator to kind of oversee that whole process. So there is initial cost, but there's not a yearly cost associated once you become endorsed. And then at some levels, there is an exam. There's 2 categories which require an exam to show competence. So reflective supervision is a part of 3 of the categories. And so this is why we also wanted to make sure that starting with the supervisors, that gets offered as well. So I think the last thing to note is that over the last year, from January to June, we offered endorsement orientation meetings once a month. So you could go on, you could get a brief overview of what endorsement was and how to apply for it, and also bring your questions. If you had particular questions, if you maybe you're already started and you have questions about what the next steps are. And so those will start up again in January of next year as well. And so you can look forward to those, seeing that announced on our website. If you don't want to wait for that, you can also connect with our endorsement coordinator or myself. And that's all. You can visit our website to get our contact information. Was that helpful, Haley?
Yes, very much. Thank you. I'm not sure if anybody else has any other questions for them.
I popped in a question in the chat box. Just curious if we could clarify that a little bit, please.
And who's speaking?
My name is Tice. So my question is related to supervisors that maybe have the experience but don't have their master's degrees. So they may have their bachelor's. Are they able to get endorsed to higher levels based off their experience? So, we have a lot of, supervisors that were grandfathered in. They've been with us for a long time, but again, may not have their higher degrees. Can they qualify for a higher endorsement?
Oh, that's a very good question. There is, in the different categories, there's different educational requirements. And so you may be speaking to category 3 of infant mental health specialist, which does require a master's degree. For you, they could apply based on having a bachelor's degree for category 2 or category 1, whichever. But as far as them being able to then offer reflective supervision to others, it's just if you look in the documentation about who you can offer reflective supervision to, is that if you're a bachelor's level, so in other words, if you receive the category 2 endorsement, you would be able to offer reflective supervision based on your experience and your expertise only to people who had bachelor's degrees or associates or high school or CDA. So you wouldn't be able to offer reflective supervision to others that have a master's degree. Does that make sense?
Yes, so it really is still based off education for that category 3, not necessarily work experience. Category 1 and 2, they can supervise anyone that's bachelor's and under. Yeah, makes sense. I was just curious more so for those folks that, have just been with us for a long time. That's all.
Right, and the Alliance for Advancement of Infant Mental Health and Michigan, who started the endorsement process, have been looking into the cultural implications of requiring, just your exact statement, of requiring degrees and not thinking about experience for this. And I think primarily they started out with having different degrees. Is that if you look at the pathway for category 3, the pathway is, it's not prevention or intervention, it's more diagnosis. So if you're thinking of, in order to diagnose, like what's the background and the kind of the clinical aspect of that work of diagnosing and thinking about what you're hypothesizing that might need extra help. And so I think that in thinking about that, that was kind of where they started, but now they're rethinking what other things might make sense. And so that is something that's actively being reviewed right now by the Alliance for the Advancement of Infant Mental Health. So it is a very complicated but necessary question, and they are really going in depth as to how they can accommodate that.
You just had one more question. It said, what expectations would you suggest with teachers to make, to take mental health consultant out of being the fixer?
I don't want to be the one answering all the questions, so I don't know if Margaret, if you're comfortable coming back in.
I think in the group that I work with, in the beginning, we really sit with defining what is reflective supervision and what it is not. And it's in a light way. Like sometimes, people are aware, they come to it with enough training that they're aware that they're trying not to do that. And I think initially they have those conversations. They say, oh, it's really hard. I really want to, and they talk about, that process. And then we figure out a way in the group for us to hold that process and notice what's coming up, but to just contain it and to just know that we're going to do other work. We're going to remain curious, or looking at the Rios that we talked about today. What might that mean that's hard for you? How does that come out when you're with that family? How does that come out when you're with that teacher? Does it create obstacles? And it's kind of looking at the process and how that impacts everybody, that strong feeling, because it's a sense of urgency usually people are feeling. And the awareness, the group definitely provides like a nice space for people to see how strong that urgency is, and how to recognize, when safety, of course, is paramount, but also when that urgency can be quieted. I'm not sure if that answered. Did that answer what you were asking?
I think you may have answered it as far as being in the reflective supervision space, but it sounds like the question is this in the setting where teachers are looking for, in our state, ECCP to come in and be the fixer of their kids. So if they have a child with a behavior issue, they call ECCP and say, you come in and you fix this problem. And so I don't know if that's just a kind of a distilled down way of what that question was. And so maybe Courtney, if you wanted to explain a little bit more, and then maybe Margaret can address that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, yeah, I was asking more from like that perspective of a lot of the times teachers want the answer because of behavioral issues with the child, or the mental health consultant coming in to be that fixer, right? That person to wave the magic wand and make everything all better. So I'm wondering just kind of what are some things you suggest to talk to teachers to kind of help decrease that need for urgency right away and to really help them get into a reflective space?
Well, I see it as I guess the ECCP is a very separate service than the consultation service. So the ECCP is going to provide, they're going to provide skills and some strategies and some activities for the teachers that will be helpful. But in the consultation sessions, it's a place for the teacher to just allow those feelings that are coming up for them, what's difficult in their work, what's confusing about it, and a place to hold their feelings, and for a place to hold their feelings, but also explore ways to not get crushed by their feelings or not react on their feelings, or maybe wonder about some other possibilities so that they can feel like they can handle the situation at hand. So I think it's a process. I think it's a process that they're held over time in the reflective supervision sessions that can happen. But I think it takes time. Like I said, sometimes I think it takes people 6 months just to feel safe in a group with a new group of people and a practitioner. But I think if they meet regularly and it's frequent, I think that trust happens. And then I think that people do start to feel safe enough to get to know what they're feeling and how to approach their work in a different way.
Okay, thank you.
And at the Connecticut Association for Infant Mental Health, Courtney, we are advocating that all disciplines receive reflective supervision, because teachers typically don't. They've through the pyramid model, if they're lucky enough to access that, they might be receiving coaching, which is different from reflective supervision in what it's holding. And so I think what Margaret's explaining is that we see, in the future, that everyone receives reflective supervision. Everyone is able to have this space where when this comes up of, I want to fix this, or I want you to fix this, they could sit with those feelings and think about it. Like, why do I want someone else to fix this? What's my part in this? What could I be curious about? Why might this child be acting this way? What is it that I can see about that? What can I wonder about? What is it like to be this child? What's it like to be his parent or her parent? And so I think that's what we're trying to explain here today, that the value of reflective supervision is that you take that deeper dive into the really harder pieces of our work, which is the emotions that come up. And part of that is that intrinsic kind of almost you have to fight against, like the fixing thing. Can somebody fix it? Can I fix it? Who has a suggestion? I want to know right now and I want to happen right away. And that's hard. And that's what you can do in reflective supervision is take the time to say, this is really hard work. And a lot of things come up for me. And so if teachers are able to get reflective supervision and those that they're interacting with, ECCP can get reflective supervision and home visitors can get reflective supervision and DCF can get reflective supervision. It creates a whole different language in how we approach things and how we think about things with especially our youngest children and their families. And so I think that Margaret, you did such a wonderful job giving kind of just this introduction to the value of reflective supervision for everyone. And so thank you so much for your participation and your questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And I think that last question, I think the group that I work with, it does come up with them and they sometimes, I think they have turned to those readings on attachment to look at how does that impact the relationship if the teacher is overwhelmed by the child's behaviors or the caregiver is overwhelmed and everybody has this, I can't handle this, your needs are too much. What message does that send? And then it's a chance for them to slow down and step back and say, well, how else would that look? Even if I feel like I can't handle this, how can I convey this to the child that I have faith that we'll figure it out, that I may not, this is hard, but we'll figure it out. And then there's a different stance. There's a stance of, you're not overwhelming. I can handle you. You deserve this trust and this faith that we're going to get somewhere different. And so I think it just allows that extra space to take a step back and look at that map of connection and helping people get back on that map so they have stronger relationships and they feel that they can handle it, even if they don't always know the right perfect strategy, but it's that faith that it'll release. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
So Ashley, I guess that's it for today, unless there was anything else.